Hello, and here we are. Welcome, friends and enemies, to Epic Realms. Today, with us, New York Times best-selling author of the Iron Druid Chronicles, co-author with Delilah S. Dawson on the Tales of Pell, the Seven Kenning series, and so much more. Welcome, Kevin Hearne. How are you doing?
Oh, doing great. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate you stopping by. I want to get your take on this. So, you actually didn't start your official writing until like college, correct?
Yes, that's right. I used to want to be an artist or like a graphic designer, really, more than a fine artist.
How did you do before that when you were in high school? Were you academically high and mighty, or were you not so much so? Like, was English a big thing in your house for you?
Yeah, it was for me anyway. I loved it. It worked for me. But the I did well. I wasn't like top of my class or anything, but yes, I was doing the honors English program, and I did get a scholarship to go to college based on you know your SAT scores at the time and your grade point average. I think that's what they were offering scholarships based on. So I was lucky in that regard because I got to go to college with my tuition paid. But yeah, it was while I was in college that I got the bug to write.
And you ended up graduating, and did you, if I'm not mistaken, you were a teacher for quite a bit of time, correct?
Well, yeah, I was an English teacher. I taught high school English for 17 years, and during that time, I was writing, not very well, but I had that sort of that hubris, that feeling that, well, since I'm an English teacher, I should know how to write a novel, and that
Right.
was incorrect. And I basically tried and failed a lot, but I never really went to a conference. I never, I picked up a couple of books here and there, and of course, I just read a lot. And those things taught me a little bit. And then the process of finally finishing a book was sort of revelatory because that was when I knew, well, hey, now I can do this. I know what it takes. So I wrote my first novel took me 6 years to write after a bunch of starts and fails to never even finish. But once I finished my first book with 6 years, then I wrote another one that was twice as long, but it took half the time. So it was, a big step up in just getting stuff done. But that too was a failure in the sense that it was just really full of cliches, really full of a lot of crutches. Basically, I was still learning. It's sort of like riding a bike with training wheels. You know what I mean? Your
Yeah.
first novel is sometimes, or second or third or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just you kind of learning how the craft is done, and then once you've got it down, then you can be fairly consistent with riding your bike or writing a book. And then that was my third novel that got published. It was Hounded. That one only took me 11 months. So that was much faster than the others. And then the second book, Hexed, took me only 6.
Did
So
you find an issue with finding publishers? Like those first couple books, did you try and get published and just get turned down, or did you
yeah,
just tell yourself, yeah, these aren't good enough?
the first one I didn't even submit. It's just monstrous. It's terrible. Yeah, it very deservedly will stay in a trunk forever. The second one, I did send out sort of like a just a slush pile kind of submission, and I got some vague interest from one publisher. And then kind of fun story is that they held on to it. They vaguely said they were interested and they were going to have other editors review it. But then they held on to it and I heard nothing. And it was while I was waiting to hear back from them that I wrote Hounded, because that was an epic fantasy. And so I wound up writing an urban fantasy just for fun to keep myself entertained while I was waiting to hear back on the epic.
Okay.
Well, then I go ahead and finish Hounded, and I get an agent and he submits it and stuff. And then this same company that had my epic and had been sitting on it for a year wanted to buy Hounded. And so that's at that point where I told my agent, hey, they actually have my epic. And so he asked them, hey, do you want that too? And they're like, let us check. Let's get back to you. And then they said, no, but we really like Hounded. So I mean, and that's fair because the second book was, it was terrible also.
Yeah.
So but it was super worthwhile. It's not like it was a waste of my time because those first two books that took me so long and were full of so many problems was me learning how to write an actual book that worked.
Right.
So it was not wasted time at all. And for anybody out there who's like, hey, I can write a novel someday, you absolutely can. I didn't get published until I was 39. So
There you go.
There you go.
And am I mistaken? I read somewhere that they actually did a producer's auction to buy your book.
Yeah, publisher. Yeah, it's sold at auction.
So I've never heard of that before, and maybe that's just me, but how does that work?
Well, okay, so if you're just a rando, dude like me, and you're submitting to a publisher, then they say, well, you can only submit to one publisher at a time. And that used to be the rule. I'm not sure how much that applies anymore, but agents had the benefit of not only being able to submit to multiple publishers at a time, but they actually could also call the publisher, have the editor on the phone and say, hey, I'm sending you something now I'm really excited about. You're going to want to take a look at it. So that is a huge advantage to having an agent and just being able to do that. So my agent submitted it to 9 publishers all at once. Within 2 weeks, 4 of them wanted it. So they then had to go to bid for it, basically, and submit what their best offer was and what they were going to offer besides money, what kind of marketing support, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So I had that luxury of being able to choose. I feel super fortunate. And I chose Del Rey and have been with them ever since. So
nice.
Yeah.
So we're talking about your first book, Hounded. Iron Druid Chronicles goes on to be wildly successful. Did you expect it to get that big? Did you expect starting off that it was going to be as many books as it was going to be, or were you like, I'm going to do one, and maybe if I can get 2 or 3 in, that would be great?
Well, I did sell it as a 3 books, and a 3-book contract, and then I didn't know if I would be able to continue after book 3. We had no idea because we just had to see how sales, did. And so, and I had no expectation that it was going to be super successful. Of course, my dream was I just want to get published. I just want to see my book on the shelf someday. And that happened. And then other things started happening too, super unexpectedly, and kind of unexpectedly, perhaps also for the publisher. They're like, we can't explain why this is doing well. So it was mostly a word of mouth thing. And it has been for a very long time because I didn't get nearly the marketing and stuff like that on it that I got in some of my later books. And what I did benefit from was that I would have Hounded came out in May of 2011, and then Hexed and Hammered came out in June and July of 2011. So that was it was a marketing ploy because they were saying to booksellers, look, here are 3 books by a brand new author. We believe in this author so much that we're going to give you 3 books all at the same time so that people who like to binge read can do so.
Oh,
and
okay.
Also, you get more shelf space, right?
Yeah.
Your people are going to notice a new name on the shelf if all of a sudden you're taking up, the space of 3 titles rather than just 1 where you can easily be skipped over.
Right. That's a great idea.
So yeah, that was the thinking behind it, and I can't argue with it because it seems to have worked. I became, people were noticing me and picking me up and then telling their friends, and thank you to everybody who did that, because I think that continues to be the best marketing there is just word of mouth.
There is no book out of my personal, experience that I've seen firsthand grow by word of mouth other than yours. Like we got an audiobook copy and I was hooked. My wife was hooked. I told a friend, he was hooked. He told 2 of his friends, they were hooked. They told relatives. And I literally sat there over the course of a year and watched all these people who came back and said, hey, this is an amazing book, and just watched it spread like a plague, but in a good way.
Yeah, right. Hopefully, yeah, the good kind. And that's, yeah. So I'm super grateful for that people are being entertained and then just telling their friends about it, because honestly, it allows me to write more. That's great.
Right. And for those that don't know, that are listening, Iron Druid is a modern urban fantasy with throwbacks to, like a lot of urban fantasies where it encompasses a lot of the different mythologies. But there's a lot of like good historical background in a lot of it because you're a big fan of history, yes?
Oh yeah, I was having a good time researching all that stuff, especially some of the Irish myth. Part of the things that was going through my head at the time was Disney. I had a young kid, and Disney at the time had these shows about fairies, and that the fairies had certain talents, and they sort of existed to serve humans or help humans or something like that. I'm like, that is not the way fairies are supposed to be. That's not,
Right.
their original conception. That's so far gone from the original mythology, I can't even. So I wanted to write a story where the fae are properly, dangerous and scary,
Right.
and then and that would adhere to the original mythology a little bit better. And then of course there's a ton of different versions of that mythology, because a whole bunch of cultures have fae, and some of them are shared and some of them borrow from one another.
Right.
And but I was trying to focus on specifically Irish stuff because of my protagonist, and also specifically Irish stuff rather than pan-Celtic was not something folks were really paying attention to. You would get some mythology that, for example, Cernunnos, the horned god. He is a figure who shows up on the continent, with the Druids on the continent a little bit more than specifically in Ireland, where he was not a big deal.
Right.
So that's kind of what I'm doing with my books, is focusing on
definitely.
the Irish stuff.
And one of the things that we're currently like looking back, I really see a story of character development. Like all the characters evolve and develop throughout the time, and even sometimes they don't even notice it till like Atticus right at the end. Sometimes even now the latest Incan Sigil book, like he doesn't realize where he needed to evolve in his life after hundreds of years. Whether it's Atticus, Oberon, obviously his language and the way he understands human life, Oberon being the Irish wolfhound, for those that don't know. Granuaile, her personal development from beginning to end, just the world views you get to see, because you're writing this during a time where our history has shifted quite a bit as well. To see how people see things in the social climate from the first book to the later books, you see this drastic change, and you see the characters reflecting on that, and I find that really awesome. And of course, a good reference to look back on is Leaf, who doesn't, his story is he doesn't change. He's the same as he was, hundreds of years ago. And I thought that was really interesting. I didn't know if you wanted to talk on that at all.
Oh, sure. I mean, he was one of the more interesting characters to write, where, he wasn't really flexible with change. He could do a little bit, but not a lot. And it turns out that his fundamental nature has not changed very much at all. Although he's done his best to try to hide it. And then another person that we get to look at who's wants to change and is having difficulty doing so is the Morrigan.
Right. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, she's got a ton of issues that she wants to deal with, but she feels constrained by the belief. Her powers come from faith. And the people who believe in the Morrigan around the world believe a certain collection of things. There are minor variations, but there's a certain way that she is. This is what the Morrigan is like in the minds of a whole bunch of people. So she couldn't escape that. She was trying to figure it out. So there's another stab at it. She gets another chance in Paper and Blood. For those of you who haven't read Incan Sigil and Paper and Blood, that does continue in the Iron Druid universe. Atticus and Oberon do show up, and will continue to do so. It's just that Atticus is no longer the narrator. Right. So you have Al McVarish being the narrator instead, And but all of these supporting characters and so on that were in the Iron Druid Chronicles are still all there. And there's plenty of, character growth to still happen for everybody. So
Excellent. And we'll definitely talk more about the Incan Sigil series here in a bit. I had another question. Were you in charge of, or was this a complete fan thing, the Twitter accounts of Oberon and Owen and their interactions? And, because almost a lot of the characters had their own Twitter handles. And I was really curious if you had a handle in those. And I figured this might be a question you might not have been asked normally.
Yeah, I was running those accounts and having fun just tweeting as those characters.
Right.
So yeah, I had an Irish Oberon account and an Archdruid Owen account. And those were for basically, I think the last 3 books is when I started doing those.
Right.
Because I found it so amusing that they would kind of play off each other. And it was just fun to tweet as those characters. But it was a lot of work. So
right.
I the accounts still exist. I just haven't, they're basically have gone dormant, for years now because I haven't kept up. Right. I couldn't,
it's hard.
Up.
It's hard to do one Twitter account, let alone, 3,
right.
4, 5.
Right. So I did have fun while that was going on. That was an amusing time for me on Twitter. Twitter can often be, a hell site, otherwise. So that was a lot of fun.
How do you feel about Oberon becoming like a novel cult icon character? Out of all the characters in this series, Oberon's kind of like the one that everyone goes, oh my God, this is the best.
Yeah. Well, here's the weird thing about it is that Oberon, in terms of his growth, he grows in his language, but otherwise as a character, he doesn't. He's really a flat character. He likes sausages and poodles at the beginning, and he still likes them at the end. You know what I mean? He's always a dog.
Yeah.
So he's not a character that I had to work on. He was just there to provide his little, his comments on things as we went. I didn't plan a single thing for Oberon as I went. And yet here he is, the most popular character. I spend all this time trying to figure out, well, how is Atticus going to grow and how is the Morgan going to grow and so on and so forth. But, that took a lot of time. But what everybody likes is the very simple character Oberon. So I thought that was an interesting irony. It continues to amuse me, and I'm really glad people dig it.
Yeah, let's talk about the Tales of Pell. You worked with Delilah S. Dawson on this series, and it's kind of like a humor throwback, make fun of all of the tropes that exist in fantasy books. How did that come to be, and how did you guys get to know each other?
Well, we started out getting to know each other through an anthology. Sometimes these anthologies get thrown together around a theme, and then you get to maybe meet or interact with some of the other people who are contributing. There was an anthology called Carney Punk, and we were basically writing urban fantasy set in a carnival. And so Delilah became a part of that anthology, and that was where I first became familiar with her as a writer. And then we got to meet on an event for Carney Punk later on, and we just kind of became friends from there. And then I started, reading some more of her work, and I was like, man, she's amazing. She's a really good writer.
Right.
So, we're just, colleagues, friends for a while. And then we decided one day we were, talking about tropes and stuff like that. And we had an event in Dallas with, it was with Charlene Harris and Jay Wells and Rachel Kane in Dallas. And after that, we were sitting at the airport waiting, to take separate flights home. We're having really bad barbecue. And I thought, what would be fun is if we had an anthology of killing the farm boy, because the farm boy is this huge trope that you see in a lot of fantasy,
right?
Where this little guy who knows, Luke Skywalker, knows nothing, and somebody comes along and says, no, secretly you're the chosen one, or you've had a power or destiny or whatever. And you're not really just this, rando farm kid. You are somebody important, and, blah, blah, blah. And that speaks to a lot. It's a white male power fantasy is what it is. So what we wanted to do was make fun of that and just keep killing the farm boy, have an anthology of short stories where the farm boy just keeps dying. And that was the original idea. But then it is really hard to put together an anthology like that. It's just a lot of work, herding authors together. And about a year later, after that, Delilah says to me, you know, this idea still is fun to me, but maybe we just write a book that way together. What do you say? You want to try it? I'm like, okay, I've never done this before. Let's give it a shot. And what we did was we outlined, we wrote 5 sample chapters just to see how it would go, with a few basic characters in mind. And it was so much fun. It was like a game of improv, right? I write a chapter, send it to Delilah. She reads it, and then she responds with a different chapter from a different, perspective. And it just sort of grew from there. And then it was like think about a Dungeons and Dragons team where everybody rolls a critical fail. It's sort of like that, where you've got this band of misfits who are, in a lot of epic fantasies, never really given their due. But once you kill the farm boy, then these people can all come to the front and have the rich stories told about them that they deserve. So that's what we set out to do, and it was a blast. And then we also wrote 2 more books in the same world, No Country for Old Gnomes, and then also The Princess Beard. So they're all humorous fantasy, tons of puns. You can read them in any order, it doesn't matter. And the map at the beginning, though, is I'm very proud of it. It's one of my favorite things that I drew the map for the Tales of Pell. And I think I've got a fun little generator on my website where you can choose your where you are from Pell, what species. Like, you could be a griffin, or you could be, a halfling or a troll or whatever. And then choose your gender. You could be male, female, non-binary, and then you can, they'll basically generate where you're from, give you a name, and a basic history. And that's a lot of fun to do that if you wanted to role play in that world. So because you've got a map,
right?
You can
Why not? Why not?
Yeah.
Speaking of role playing, are you a role player?
Yes.
Nice.
I wouldn't say that I'm like highly skilled or anything like that, but I do like to do it. Right now I'm in a game playing one called Mutants and Masterminds.
Love the game. Love the system.
Yeah. I'm having a good time with it. I am a sort of a random, sort of like a potion wizard, named Pessel. And I have a magical power with liquids. I could change the form of liquids. So I could actually do the water to wine thing.
Nice.
Or whatever I want. And then I just have these potions. Like, one is an area of effect spell. It's a gravy bomb. So you throw it in there, and then everybody's distracted because, oh my God, they're covered in gravy and it tastes delicious, and they're just licking themselves and they're not fighting anymore. So it allows you to maybe score some hits and stuff like that sometimes. So I love like silly stuff like that. It's a really fun game.
I always thought that if Iron Druid was a role-playing game and we had to pick a system, we'd pick Mutants and Masterminds because you could pretty much do anything with it.
Oh, you know what? That wouldn't be bad at all. Yeah. I think it would be fun. I think the Iron Druid world has a lot of opportunities for role playing. And in fact, I should probably say that right now, Hero Forge Minis has an Atticus O'Sullivan miniature.
I saw that. I did see that.
Yeah.
Was that a limited edition, or was that like?
It's still available.
Nice.
I think I've taken the link down, but maybe I can try to share it again. But there's also like a sweepstakes going for it right now. There's a completed painted version of it where it's highly detailed, and you can get you could win the painted mini, and then you could also win a copy of Hounded, the new one coming out in March that we're going to talk about later.
Yeah,
I have to share that link with you at some point.
Were you guys, when you guys were writing the Princess Beard and that, were you guys trying to see who could crack the other one? Like, who can write the most ridiculous thing possible and see if it flies with the other one?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, and we were getting some stuff from the editor too. Like, really, guys, are you seriously going to do that right now? I can't believe you did. Like, we actually grossed out the copy editor. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, there was a chapter where in the Princess Beard, like, there's some stuff in the Princess Beard like nobody's ever written stuff like this before. And a ton of jokes, for example, about menstruation, just a whole bunch of puns and stuff like that, one after the other, that Delilah wrote. And I'm like, okay, well, how do I one up this? It's practically impossible, but I'm going to give it a shot. And so I had a bunch of immature jokes after that in the next chapter. So we were having a blast, going back and forth with that. And it was so much fun because you're doing this with your buddy, and you know that whenever you get a new chapter, you're going to be laughing your butt off. So yeah, if you guys haven't tried those out, give them a shot.
Yeah, they're hilarious.
They're a good time.
So moving on from there, another series which I asked you about earlier today, the Seven Kenning series.
Yeah.
Is that going to be more than 3 books, or is that planned to be 3 books?
Yeah, it's planned to be just 3.
Okay.
And it will be 3. The third book, I'm not sure exactly how long it's going to wind up being. It is, but I'm in the midst of writing it right now, and it's called A Curse of Krakens. So of course, when the Seattle Kraken announced their team and all that stuff, I was overjoyed because I've had my Kraken's title for years, ever since I started doing the series.
Nice.
So I'm now a Seattle Kraken fan, as well as an Ottawa Senators fan. So
Okay.
my Eastern and Western conference teams there. So, but yeah, the Seven Kennings is there's 2 books out now, and third is on the way. And I think it'll be the thing that I'm most proud of in terms of just like a professional writing standpoint, because I'm doing things there that structurally that hasn't really been done a lot before. I'm juggling 11 different first-person points of view, which is really difficult to do in epic fantasy. So it's something that, if you're trying to read an epic fantasy that is not the same old, there's a lot of things out there right now that is not the same old. I should say we're living in a golden age right now of fantasy.
Right.
But structurally, I'm doing something that I think very few people have attempted. So yeah, give it a shot.
How did you plan on putting together a series where you have, obviously it's a fantasy, for those that don't know, it's a fantasy setting in a world where there's these certain powers and like different, I don't want to say regions because it's not always regional, has the, special powers or abilities that they get from accomplishing certain things without giving it too much away. How was it to try and go, okay, well, I want to do this where there are these powers basically, but do it a little bit differently than what's been done before?
Yeah, I mean, I've been writing, some of the big reveals about why is the world the way it is. If you look at the map that's at the beginning, I did write the map or draw the map first to figure out where are all the Kenning sites, and hopefully not spoiling too much, but basically you get a Kenning or a magical power of varying strength if you throw yourself into, at the mercy, I guess, of a certain natural, I don't know what to call it, a disaster, a natural something. It might be a lake of lava. It might be a certain underwater cave that you have to dive into and swim out of. And then you could be blessed with, the first Kenning being fire. If you dive into the lake of lava and walk out, you've been blessed.
Yay.
But if you don't walk out, well, then you're toast. So yeah, it is a high cost to become a magical person in that world. But if you do, then yeah, you've got a pretty good, powerful life ahead of you. So I had a great time coming up with that whole system, and then finally kind of doing the payoff right now, explaining how did it get there, why is it the way it is, and then is that going to change people's perception of what is this? Is it actually a blessing or is it something else? So yeah.
And I also like the fact that it's medieval fantasy, but it's also it's got elements of like, this is also a spy book. This is also a mystery book. It's also an epic fantasy type book. Mm-hmm. How was it trying to go put all those little pieces in there and still have it maintain the same feel?
Well, one of the things I'm trying to do here structurally is tell the story of an epic from people who are not a knight or a leader. Those people show up in the narrative, but they are not the main characters. The story is being told from the point of view of a lot of different people, because when you have a war or an invasion, a lot of different kinds of people are affected. And whose story you choose to tell is a pretty big decision, So I was trying to tell stories from the points of view of young people and old people and people of all different kinds of backgrounds, so that you could actually get a feel for how epic the epic was. But it's also a story of an invasion, of colonialism. We have 2 different uh, races of giants who are trying to colonize in different ways a continent that has been peaceful up until that time. And now they have to decide, well, how do we deal with this very existential threat? There are different ways that, to deal with it. So that has been kind of my focus here, is how do you deal with the scourge of colonialism, and also a lot of other things like, why are epics always focused on monarchies? So I have only one monarchy, but there's some other governmental systems, and the monarchy that we do have, people are rather dissatisfied and would like maybe try something else. And so there's one of those themes in running throughout the series is, hey, we don't have to do things the way our parents or older generations did just because.
Right.
Why don't we try something new? If we can see that this is not working, let's try something else.
Mm-hmm.
So
definitely.
yeah.
Did you have like a pegboard in the back where you had all these pins and strings attached, like in the thing, to try and figure out, okay, well, this guy's going to meet this guy over here, but we haven't told that story yet, but we're going to drop the hint that that's going to happen later on, but it's in the past.
It was really difficult at first, but what made it possible for me was using Scrivener rather than Microsoft Word.
I've heard that before. You're not the first person to mention that.
If you are doing something highly complex, where you have multiple points of view and you have the perspective changes from chapter to chapter, scene to scene, whatever, it's easier in Scrivener to write those scenes and rearrange them than it is in Microsoft Word, because of course in Word, if you want to rearrange stuff, what are you doing? You're selecting the stuff you want to move, and then you're copying it or cutting it and then pasting it elsewhere. A whole bunch of scrolling and stuff is going on, and it's a pain, especially for a very large document, because Microsoft Word starts to get us unstable around 100, 120,000 words. And, I'm at 200,000 words. It wouldn't handle it. So, Scrivener is super stable and will allow you to easily move things around, which is what I needed to do for A Plague of Giants. When I was doing my edits for that, I had to move the order of narration around quite a bit, and I would not have been able to do that with Microsoft Word. So I didn't have a pegboard, but I did have some really good writing software that allowed for flexibility for structural stuff like that. So I would recommend Scrivener. It's a big learning curve if you are, there's a lot of features on it that you might not ever use, but the idea, the organization tools and stuff they have for complex narratives, I think are second to none, and it just works for me. And I should be clear that I don't use Scrivener for the urban fantasies. I don't need it. I just use Microsoft Word for the urban fantasies, because they're much simpler in terms of their structure, and you only have one or two, maybe three narrators, whereas I've got 11 to 12 in the seven kennings.
Right.
So yeah.
And I do like the development of each character, because you don't feel like you linger too far on one character before you switch, but you just get enough where you're like, oh, I can't wait to get back to that.
Yeah, hopefully that's what people feel from going from character to character. I know that there are favorites and stuff like that, of course, but every character has their own journey that they're going on, and hopefully it's going to go to a better place.
Will we get new characters, perspectives? Okay.
Yeah. For example, there are characters that were introduced in the first two books that were part of somebody else's story, but now they get their own narration. Like in the Blight of Blackwings, Finton and Dervin go into a restaurant called the Roasted Sunchuck, and there is a couple of giants who work there. That one is a Fire Lord, and she's the chef. Her name is Hollett, and then her husband Orden is the bartender. So they are just these background characters in A Blight of Blackwings, but Hollett becomes a narrator in A Curse of Krakens.
Oh, excellent.
So there's things like that where, you have some characters that you've heard of before that become narrators, and then there are some straight up brand new characters that come along a little bit later, and are introduced in A Curse of Krakens. And then of course we have some old favorites. Abhinav is still there, and so on. Yeah.
Excellent. So later on, you came up with Incan Sigil, which takes place, as we mentioned before, in the Iron Druid world.
Mhm.
but at the same time, it's its own thing. It's its own system. How did
Yeah.
that come about? Did you sit there and go, I really want to write more in the Iron Druid world, but I promise people I'm not going to write an Iron Druid book.
Yeah.
So here's what I'm going to do. And then you just came up with this excellent concept and character. And there's so many magic systems in that world. It was really great to see another one and kind of watch it flush out and still get flushed out.
Yeah, yeah. That came about. I had a lot of options after the Iron Druid. After Atticus was done narrating his story, there's a whole bunch of other characters, of course, that could tell their own. But the one that compelled me was this guy who shows up in a short story in Besieged. He's just called and sort of dismissed as a Scottish wizard in this story called Cuddle Dungeon. So Flittish just
Sorry.
calls him, yeah.
I'm laughing
Flittish,
because I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that story. Oh
remember
yeah,
that story.
that story.
So that story is where Al McVarish makes his first appearance, and he's there. He's basically reporting that there is an issue in this dungeon, and somebody that they've been looking for, that the Tua de Danann have been looking for, a rogue fairy, basically. It can be found there. So, but I was fascinated, like, who is this guy and why is he the way he is? Because he walks into this underground, S&M club in a full-on, cashmere top coat and mustache, that's with the handlebars. I mean, he looks all fancy and proper, slick shoes, and he doesn't even care about what's going on around him at all. He is focused on his mission and so on. And I'm like, well, I want to know more about this guy.
Right.
Who is he and what's he there for? So that's kind of the impetus for it. I'm like, I'm more interested by him than telling a story about the werewolves or the witches or something like that. I want to know what this guy is, and then what is, if he's called a wizard, well, what is his magic system? So that's where everything kind of got started. And once I got into Al, and then of course I went to Glasgow, and it's a wonderful city, and I fell in love with the whole thing. And I also have a friend who lives here in Canada, who is originally from Glasgow, and so he's been super kind to go over my manuscript and coach me on how Glaswegians would say things.
Okay.
So a lot of the Scottish language stuff that you see in Incan Sigil is courtesy of a native there from the region. So, and I don't try to exhaustively depict the way that accent is actually spoken. I just have enough in there to kind of hopefully give you the flavor of it. And some of the really fun, colorful slang terms are joyful.
Well, we haven't talked about him yet, but I might as well bring him up. Is Luke
Yeah.
Daniels and his audiobook reading. And I always wonder, every time I hear him do something or say something, I go, now did Kevin just put that in there to mess with him?
I did.
Like the voice text phone app where he's supposed to be, and switching the accents on that. I was like, did that phone app, did he put that in there? Like come up with this elaborate story where he has to use his phone just to hear Luke Daniels do a automated voice app that eventually switches to between accents, but it's still a voice app and it's not him.
Yeah, right. Here's the thing. Yeah, Luke can do anything. He's amazing. And he had actually done stuff like that before, because he of course narrates a whole bunch of other stuff.
Right.
And he narrates sci-fi stuff, and whenever you have like a computer or an AI or something speak, there's always sort of this little robotic thing going on that's similar to what these text to speech apps are like. So it wasn't a completely new thing for him to have to do that. So but yeah, I do mess with him a tiny bit. That wasn't a purposeful thing to mess with him on, but I do occasionally mess with him. Like there was one point in a book where Granuaile was going to be running into a Polish town, and I could have
say the Polish interaction.
Yeah, I was gonna pick. I could have picked something easily pronounceable, but I picked something with only one vowel and a whole bunch of Y's and Z's and weird stuff going on in it. And I think it was I can't even say it now. I'd have to read it again. I could say it if I see it in front of me, because I learned enough Polish to be able to read it. But that's about it.
Nice.
He's awesome.
How did you get Luke to come in for some of these? To first start, was it just you know, like, oh, here's, you know, I'm auditioning, or they picked him, and you were just like, this guy's great, let's keep him for everything?
Yeah, it was luck. At first, I had no input whatsoever. I'm a brand new author, and nobody knows who I am, and it doesn't matter what I think. But in fact, at the time, remember this was 2011. Well, it would have been 2010 when we were signing the contract for it. They were like, "You're gonna have an audiobook for these." So I'm like, "Really? Okay." They're going to pay you money too. And I'm like, "Oh, really? Okay. Well, I'm never going to earn this out." Boy, was I wrong. Because at the time, audiobooks to me were very boring things that you pressed play on to, get your high school kids to go to sleep if you wanted that for some reason. So yeah, they were terribly narrated, not very, entertaining readings of a novel. It was super dry stuff at the time. And Luke is one of these people who came in and said, I'm an actual trained Shakespearean actor. You don't have to read these dryly.
Right.
You can, read them entertainingly. So why don't we? And so he was assigned to me, and I had no idea. I'd never met him or talked to him or anything like that. And he did such a fantastic job. I remember listening to the first time. And even though all the jokes, I had written all the jokes in the books, but I still laughed because of the way he delivered them. He surprised me, and I loved it. It was great. So yeah, after those first three books, we just like, these are great. I just want to have Luke continue to do my stuff. So
Yeah.
it was completely fortunate that I, first, got paired up with Luke. But yeah, ever since it's been like, yeah, let's do Luke for everything because he's so dang good.
Right. There's nothing. I've listened to dozens of his books, and I've yet to hear the same character or the same voice in any of the series or any of the books that I've listened to him on. So
He's
yeah,
fantastic.
amazing. Back to the Incan Sigil. Did you have an issue with did you have to balance out the comedy sections with the non-comedy sections with Buck Foy and the Hobgoblin, and them going back and forth, and some of the other characters? Obviously, when you were writing those books, did you have to like go, okay, I need to scale the comedy back a little bit, or did you say I need to add more in there? Because it seems pretty well balanced.
Yeah, you know what? I don't really think about that balance thing so much. I mean, Buck Foy is, if you want to think about it in like a apples to apples kind of a thing, Buck Foy is essentially filling the role that Oberon played. Right. He is comedy relief. But at the same time, one of the things that I enjoy about Buck Foy is that he has the opportunity to grow in ways that Oberon does not.
Yeah.
So he's got issues, and there, we haven't really delved into them too much yet, but he's got reasons why he doesn't want to be in Fairy, or in Tir na Nog, or any of the Fey realms anymore. And why is he alone, and all this other kind of stuff. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we really haven't explored yet, but we can get to with Buck that we couldn't do necessarily with Oberon. So I like that he's humorous, but he can also have some depth to him. And I just really enjoy, though, his give and take with Al and Nadia, and well, basically anybody he comes into contact with. So yeah, I didn't really plan a balance, but I'm glad it worked out okay.
yeah, definitely. When you went from Incan Sigil to Blood, Paper, and Blood, because Incan Sigil was very much like, we're in the Iron Druid world, but this is an Incan Sigil story. And then you get to Paper and Blood, and we're in the Iron Druid Chronicles world, and it's an Incan Sigil story, but it's also very much an Atticus story. And I don't want to go into too much detail because it's a fairly newer book. Did you have any issues with that? With that, I don't want to say juxtaposition, I guess would be the closest word, when you were putting that together. And do you think that's something that you have to think about when you're coming up with future books?
Well, in a lot of ways, the Atticus and Oberon storyline in Paper and Blood finishes off some stuff from the Iron Druid Chronicles for good that some folks had lingering questions about.
Right.
And so that's kind of what it was doing, where it was a story. It takes place like a full year or more after the end of the Iron Druid Chronicles. So it was not really a thing that I could tell in the Iron Druid Chronicles itself, right? It was not, the time wasn't right for that story. So to be able to tell, to bring that storyline to its actual, conclusion, I needed to introduce this whole new set of characters and magic system and everything else so that you understand, fully what really happened. So yeah,
you also get like people that felt like they didn't have a sense of closure now get that sense of closure.
Yeah.
And we'll obviously, you said they're probably going to come back in future books. So, it's always great. But I love the new Incan Sigil and Paper and Blood series. It's been excellent.
Thank you so much. I'm enjoying the heck out of writing them, and I hope I get to write more. So yeah, please, if you guys if you'd like to see some more, please buy Incan Sigil and Paper and Blood and tell your friends like you did about Hounded and Hexed and all the rest.
Something I see that's a common denominator amongst a lot of your books, whether it's Incan Sigil and Al loves his gin, or whether it's the good Widow McDonough and her Irish whiskey and her Tullamore Dew. By the way, I'm going to ask another question about that here in a second, but
sure.
What do you seem on your Twitter account seem to have a personal appreciation for the spirits? Is that something that you had beforehand? Is that something that you just were like, I love it here and I'm going to take my knowledge and what I love and put it in my books? Or was it the other way around?
Yeah, I've especially during the pandemic, I've kind of realized that if I want to have anything, fancier beyond cracking open a beer, that I need to learn how to do it myself because I couldn't go out. So I kind of became an amateur mixologist and figured out how to do a few basic drinks and shared those with folks because I figure everybody else was in the same boat as I was in that regard. You can't go out and have your bartender who knows what they're doing do stuff for you. So you got to learn a few basic tricks if you want to have, something kind of fancy because you have a reason to celebrate or whatever. So, but I found out that also that when it comes to distilling or brewing or anything like that, there's so much going on now, and it's really an art form. There's a whole bunch of chemistry, but there's an art to it as well, and I'm really appreciative. It's a part of really enjoying your meal sometimes. It lends an extra set of flavors and brings out other flavors that would be absent otherwise, or you might not detect sometimes. Wine aficionados can go on and on about how wine complements certain foods and so on. Well, the same can be true of certain spirits with certain foods.
I agree.
I find that like bourbon in particular, if you're having bourbon with steak, then your life is good. And so, yeah, that kind of a thing is certainly a part of it. And so it's since I know a little bit about it, it's, I try to include a little bit of it in the book for folks who also like it. And then, for folks who are not familiar with it or don't care for it, it is a glimpse into a part of culture that, it's like visiting. It's a vicarious experience. That's what all fiction is, right? You get to visit something or experience something you wouldn't normally. And that's part of the fun of reading fiction.
Right. Well, and like I said, it seems, seems to be an ongoing theme in a lot of the books. So I thought, and obviously I was curious, like, did he used to like whiskey and he just started drinking gin? And so that's what Al's drinking now. And the thing is because of that. And, so I was really curious about that. And I also appreciate the spirits. I also helped teach a class to friends on spirits over the pandemic as well.
Oh, very cool.
So yeah, I totally understand exactly what you're saying because we did the same exact thing. I want to make myself the best mojito possible and the best, whatever, instead of just rum and Coke. So
exactly.
What are a few of your favorite? Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that specifically, why did gin show up so significantly in Incan Sigil? Is because that was actually a result of going to Scotland.
Oh, okay.
Because when I was in Glasgow, I was thinking, well, it's going to be just whiskey all the dang time. And there is certainly that there. But what I noticed, clear as day, is that gin is a really huge thing in Scotland right now. That if you go to like the airport and the duty-free shops and all that stuff, you will see almost as much gin on the shelves as you will whiskey. Now, there's if you want rum, you're out of luck. I mean, you know what I mean? If you want other things, no. But what are they distilling in Scotland right now? They are distilling a lot of whiskey, as they always have, but they're also really into gin. It's a very burgeoning industry there. A lot of micro distilleries and stuff like that. And because of that experience, that I figured that would be an appropriate thing to kind of explore with Al a little bit. That it's not just what you expect. It's not just Scotch.
Right.
It's gin too. That's a very popular part of the culture there right now.
And it takes a stereotype away. People don't have to like think that there's this stereotype that was thrown in there. It's reality. People can like whatever they want to like.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
and I think it's even mentioned in the books. But he's like, well, you don't like Scotch? What the hell?
Yeah.
And he's like, no, I don't mind it, but I like a good gin. So what's wrong with that? And I that was really nice. What's your favorite go-to? Some of your favorite go-to drinks?
Are we talking about cocktails? Or are we talking about spirits in
How
general?
about both? Let's do both.
Okay. So if we're going to talk gin, there's one that's made in Victoria, Canada called Empress 1908.
Okay.
And it's an indigo. And then when you because it has the butterfly pea flower extract. Okay. P as in PEA. Sometimes if I don't say that right, people think, wait a minute, you're having something made out of butterfly pea. No, butterfly pea flower extract is it turns it that fun indigo color, and then it is pH sensitive, so that you pour the gin in the rocks glass, and then you add your tonic, and it's like magic science.
Oh.
The gin changes color.
Nice.
So yeah, it's really fun to have one of those gin and tonics, and then with just a little bit of garnish of some kind, whether it's cucumber or anything. Empress is fantastic. Is a great go-to gin, and it's tough to find in the States. I'm very sorry, because this is a bizarre thing. The FDA doesn't really think butterfly pea flower extract is safe or something. Even though pretty much all of the other countries are cool with it, and you can therefore get indigo gins in Canada or made in Europe or wherever. You have to have it kind of imported in the States, and then it's not really legal for them to distill it there.
Well, I'm in Minnesota, so I'm unofficially Canadian, so we'll just go north and grab some ourselves.
There you go. Yeah, do that. And then there's if you're looking for a good Scottish gin, the Botanist is really good. That's fantastic stuff. There's a lot of good stuff out there, actually. And I mentioned a couple of them. I think there was a illegal gin, something like that. I think it's what it's called. It's mentioned in the Incan Sigil books.
All right.
And when you have it, it does have the spice profile in it is a lot different than what you get with some others, and it really goes well with cinnamon and cloves as your garnish. And an orange slice. That's kind of the profile you get with it. So I love gin because you do have the ability to have a whole bunch of different flavors you don't normally get with some other spirits.
Someone on our chat said illicit gin.
Illicit gin. That's what it is. Not illegal. Illicit. Thank you.
There we go.
Yeah, I did get to try it while I was there. It's just the name escaped me here.
Awesome. So speaking of, we're talking about the drinks. Obviously, we talked about, my question was going to be about the Widow McDonough. How many Twitter posts do you get of people sending you pictures of Tullamore Dew saying to the good old widow?
Yeah, right. She was great. She was actually the only character that was based on somebody real. That she was based on my own grandmother. My grandmother liked to sit on the porch and have a little shot of whiskey and just watch the world go by and make comments. So that's where that whole thing came from. But yeah, Tullamore Dew is a surprisingly drinkable whiskey that you can get for fairly cheap. It's a just a nice Irish whiskey for sort of an everyday kind of thing. When you don't want to spend a buttload of money for a special occasion, that's just a good one.
Right. I'm one who does TMI here. I'm one who cries at movies for. My wife will be sitting next to me and we'll be fine, but I'll tear up at a moment that might not even be super tender. But I don't necessarily do that for books. But there was the moment where the Widow McDonough was doing her prayer and she saw it and I teared up. I was like, oh, she got to see, oh, that's so. And I'm like, no, who's cutting onions in this room? So well done on that note.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was a bit where, there was a lot of stuff, emotion going into that. Atticus getting to say goodbye to the Widow McDonough was basically me. I never got to say goodbye to my grandma, so that was kind of born out of that whole thing.
Yeah, it was a good tender moment. Really awesome. And now, speaking of the Iron Druid Chronicles, you're getting new stuff out.
Yeah. Well,
New covers and
Yeah.
maybe some new other little stuff going on. Tell us about this.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. So this year is actually the 10-year anniversary, and we were supposed to have them come out this year, but maybe you've heard about supply chain issues.
No.
And yeah. So we have to delay it a little bit, but the fact is that we're getting brand new reissue editions. They're going to be trade paperback size, so slightly larger than the mass markets, and reset and edited a tiny bit for like some things that have annoyed me for a long time. There's like a typo in Hounded where Melina is saying that they got their just desserts, but in the book it says just deserts, and I'm like, oh my god, please, we got to fix this. So there's like little tiny things like that we're fixing. And then also what I'm very, very excited about is that we're going to finally be able to include in print for the first time some short stories and novellas that have previously only been available in ebook and audio. So for example, in Hounded, you get Clan Rathskeller and Kaibab Unbound, which are two short stories that occur right before the events of Hounded. And then at the end of Hexed, you will get the novella Grimoire of the Lamb. And then in Hammered, you're going to get the short story called A Test of Metal, which is narrated by Granuaile. And it's what she was doing while Atticus was in Asgard. She's with Oberon. And then one of the coolest things about redoing this and reissuing them is the fact that I get to put Two Ravens and One Crow, which is a novella that was originally printed at the back of Hunted. I get to put it in the back of Tricked, where it actually belongs now.
So they're going to be in chronological order.
Yes, that's
Nice.
The other thing we're finally going to be able to do is fix things, present things in a fairly chronological order now. So I'm really excited about that. So yeah, Tricked will give you that, and then also in Tricked is a longish author's note from me explaining the chronology and why we're doing the things that we're doing and what's going on, and not just explaining the chronology of the series, but also how the real world chronology, right, like where Atticus and Oberon's stuff actually began in 2010ish, and then that means that all of the stuff in the later books that happened after Granuaile's training period, Trapped and so forth,
right,
that is actually 2022 next year.
Wow.
So these reissues are coming out when all of the main action of the late series is actually happening, supposed to happen. So I'm kind of excited about that. And then the new covers are, wow. They're done by the same artist. Her name is Sarah Coleman, who does the Incan Sigil books. And so there's a lot of fun Celtic knotwork on them. There's a drawing of Atticus and Oberon on them. And then there are little hidden things in all of the knotwork. It changes from book to book so that you have little moments that are specific to each particular book. Like, for example, on Hammered, there's Thor's hammer at the very top in the corners. And then down below, you'll see Ratatosk. And then you'll also see Hugin and Munin, Odin's ravens. And then if the coloring of the whole thing is this midnight blue, it's just gorgeous, because they do a nighttime raid, right, on Asgard, because, Leaf is a vampire and needs the nighttime. So I love all of the fun little nods to the actual content of the book. And then what's really going to be happy for a lot of folks is that the spines are all consistent. Like when these get reissued, they're all going to have a consistent look on the spine. Because what happened during the original run is that at book 7, everything changed. That you had the title first at the top of the spine, and then my author's name was at the bottom for books 1 through 6, and then books 7 through 9, my name was at the top. They switched it. They put my name at the top and the title at the bottom. Drove people nuts for good reason. It does, right. Like if you're trying to have a series displayed on your shelf, it's noticeable when it switches. So this will be an opportunity for people to have a gorgeous, consistent look on their shelves, and also have a bunch of extra content that was never there before for print readers. So it's going to be a great opportunity for everybody to collect it, and I will be coming down to the States to sign.
Awesome. So,
yeah,
it's going to be great.
Yeah.
Well, you are at Kevin Hearne on Twitter with an E at the end, people, with an E at the end. We don't want to be a sports person here. At Kevin Hearne on both Twitter and Instagram. and your / author Kevin on Facebook. You can catch him on kevinhearne.com. And for everybody else, I'd like to say to you, thanks for joining us tonight. It's been a blast.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Coming up, everybody, we are going to be having in 2 weeks Owen Casey Stevens, who is a game designer for Starfinder, and I believe he's working on some 5th edition D&D stuff as well. And audiobook reader, narrator Jarrett Lemaster is going to be joining us on the 29th of November. Next December 13th, world-renowned, one of the most well-known comic book people in the world, Chuck Dixon. If you've ever heard of anything in the Batman universe during the 80s, 90s, 2000s, he was behind it. And of course, at the end of the year, Robert N. Charette, I believe I'm pronouncing his name right. He's the creator of Shadowrun. He makes a bunch of minifigures for Warhammer since the 70s, all kinds of awards, things like that. So stick around for all of those guests coming up. For all of you who are listening to the podcast, thank you so much. And we'll see you next time on Epic Realms.